Hey everybody, welcome to Snowpal's Software Development and Architecture podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. We have Kramer, who's the founder and chief product officer of Cooperative Computing. Kramer is dedicated to transforming lives and is a father of nine, still married to the wonderful girl, and lives in Dallas, Texas. Kramer, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation.
Krish, it's fantastic to be here. I'm very excited about this topic.
Awesome. I cannot wait to get started myself. So, folks, today we are going to be talking about automated economy. We've covered a fair range of topics in the last several weeks. This one I'm very excited about because I know even lesser about, and I'm looking forward to learning plenty about it. Have lots of questions. I'm sure you do as well. So, without further ado, let's get started. I'm just going to start with the simple question, and then we'll dig deeper, Kramer. For a lot of us who think we know a little bit about this, but not exactly the phrasing of these two words. If you could just tell us what is automated economy.
Yeah, 100%. So, I think as we go through life, things are happening around us and we don't necessarily always observe them in their totality. And one of those things that have slowly but surely happened across the ages is economic transformation. That economic transformation is driven by the consumer's needs, and those consumers' needs push up into what happens in those economic situations. So we started out with trading of goats and fish and cattle, and that was cumbersome. So we moved from that into a fiat economy, and that fiat economy allowed us to exchange cash, and that cash was backed by something, right? And as we have accelerated into what we have today, it is the automated economy that we live in right now. So the components of those automated economy we can start to see around us, even though we don't call them that. A good example is this. We quite often share this with the strategic people that we advise. If you look at Airbnb and you look at it compared to the top three hotel chains, Airbnb is almost three times the size of those hotel chains. If you look at Tesla and where it's at against the traditional car manufacturers, and while you say Tesla's an EV and Airbnb as an asset management company, what they've learned to do is connect into and hyper accelerate themselves into an automated economy. The automated economy has some really key attributes to it. Number one, it's hyper automated. The ability for you to go get an Airbnb, make two clicks, or an Uber, or the ability for you to go buy Tesla, which is totally online. The whole purchase process has been accelerated through digital enablement. These hyper automated companies are now making up what we exposed as the automated economy. And the world is going to continue to accelerate. And the rapid adoption of how we get things shipped to our home, and we don't even think about it anymore. Why? Because the brands are starting to say, I'm going to take advantage of what you want and what you seek in that automation to give you the maximum benefit to keep you sticky with me. And so the automated economy is those three key things. It's hyper automated, it's hyper personalized. It knows you better than you know yourself, right? And it's built off of data driven decisions. Those three things are making the people in the hyper automated economy, those companies, and the consumers of those more and more sticky to that automated economy. So if you look at those three things, you look at the brands that you use, the services that you use, the way that you use them, you'll see that they're driven by those three things that catapult that hyper automation.
This is there couldn't have been a better start. This is me sitting in a class and learning as we go, right? This is awesome. So you mentioned 3 points: hyper automation, personalization, and data driven. I'm just grabbing notes as I go. So sorry if you hear some the sound of
100%.
keyboard here. So I want to talk about each of those, and you took some great examples as well: Airbnb and Tesla. But before we go, I'm going to ask a few seemingly random questions, but hopefully they'll all connect towards the end. At least that's my hope. The first question is: there has always been automation, right? We've had automation over the years. It's changed, it's improved, but going back to the days of say Henry Ford and automation of cars and how many vehicles you could make, there has been automation and we've just improved upon that automation. So does that mean, my very first question, Kramer, is this a new term to something that has always been there, or is this new because there are certain aspects to this that make it different from the types of automations we've had over the years?
I think that is an excellent question, one that I think enables us to explore this opportunity about what does hyperautomation do for the automated economy. So automation in the past was very localized and it transcribed to a very specific task, whether that was in manufacturing or any form of robotics where automation made a lot of sense for what we were trying to do at scale or at mass. What's occurring in today's world is the automation now is no longer localized to a single entity transaction. So hyperautomation, we work with a company right now. That company allows you to interconnect supply chains across 140 different domains, 140 domains, to allow that transaction all the way from a supplier who's making a bolt that has to show up on a inventory list into the raw goods for manufacturing of a car, and then that car's finished goods for a part that goes into the finished good for the car. What is changing now in this automation is it's no longer localized to just a single entity. It's now grown wings and spider webs that operate much like our brains do. So the patterns of this hyperautomation are interconnected states across dimensions of both the supply chains that are connected, the banking systems that fund those supply chains, all of the artifacts that go along with those. So hyperautomation is driving this huge, huge interconnectedness that's breaking down silos very, very quickly. That is the
Okay,
difference in that automation stream.
so this is I'm going to ask some more questions about that just so I capture the essence of it, right? So there has been automation, right? You agree that there has been
Yes.
automation over the years. Is the if based on your summary there, Kramer, if I took one or two things out of it, would hyper automation be the crux of that difference? Did I get that
Yes.
correct?
It is the hyper automation and the spider web of that hyper automation where you're no longer just localized to a single instance of what the automator is doing. It's now interconnected across other automators in a huge spectrum of automation that's now connecting all that together in millisecond transactions.
Wow. Okay. Brilliant. Right. So in that case, as somebody who, another question here, right? As somebody who understands automation and how things have been automated over the years, but somebody who's not particularly aware or as cognizant of this connection, the connectivity between the automation that you mentioned here, the spiderweb, how do we react to it? Like, what do we need to do? How do we need to do things any differently than how we may have done it in the past?
That's a great example. One of the things that we do as a company at Cooperative Computing, we focus on what we call digital enablement. Okay. And we're often asked, what does digital enablement mean? Right. So we're trying to digitally enable you to accelerate into this automated economy. Well, here's what this means. So if you look at the future of economic transactions, financial transactions, right? Before you would have to go into a bank, establish yourself into that banking system. That banking system then was a moderator of you into other banking transactions. And the KYC function, the who you are, was autonomous to the bank, but didn't move outside that bank very well. So you had to go sign up for another service, maybe bill trust or bill pay. And then you had to sign up for another service. So what you have to learn to do now to take advantage of this process and what we do with digital enablement is we map out your whole end-to-end strategy for growth. Let's say that you're a entrepreneur, and let's say you've figured out how to make bundt cakes. There is a bundt cake company here in Dallas called Nothing Bundt Cakes. Absolutely phenomenal food. Okay, and that company has established the storefront, and that storefront found growth, and that storefront wanted to actually do what you do, which is you franchise to multiple storefronts. Well, more important than the franchising to multiple storefronts is how do I hook up to a supply chain that delivers the experience that I get from the store of that fantastic food without waiting in line and get to my doorstep in an integrated fashion? And how do you think about that as that entrepreneur? So as we sit down with that entrepreneur and we go through that whole end-to-end process, the 3PL, the ability to get the product in and out of that 3PL in a timely fashion. That's measured in hours, by the way, right? Hours. It's got to move in
Right.
and out, right? And then if I have to have a distribution setup that goes across 5 states instead of 3 cities, what do I have to do? I've got to have raw materials that go into these different distribution locations so that I can manufacture those bundt cakes at the same quality. All of the points that connect it now have to be materialized. And in the world that we live in, everything is built twice. Once we build it in our minds and conceive it. The second building of it is when we take our hands and craft what our minds and our vision has seen and make it real. Digital enablement allows you to take all those points and turn them into reality. And we live in the age of Superman. The possibilities and the understanding of those, we call this the art of possible, is so fastly, it's changing so quickly that if you don't have someone who's looking at that and playing with that and in that all the time, 24 hours a day, then it's you struggle as a company to take advantage of that. So what do you have to do specific to what you said to do it? You've got to understand all the points, and you've got to have someone who knows what those look like. You got to remove the risk of someone guessing, because your investments in those have to be elegantly placed on the table and then executed fairly flawlessly. So we've done this digital enablement now with 200 customers. And out of that 200 customers, we've gotten a 99% acceleration success rate. And so it's super important that you understand where are those points that um, connectedness for the hyper automation and the personalization, which is super crucial to the future. Um, Execute in your actual process of being an entrepreneur to take advantage of it.
Lovely. I'm trying to draw this. I'm going to convince you to come back, hopefully, because I'm trying to draw this diagram in my mind, and I feel like next time we do this, we draw this out. It'll actually, sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, because I'm trying to imagine the connectivity here. So you mentioned localization, and your example here is perfect. You mentioned a number of different touch points. Each of them being automated is important, but am I correct in saying, Kramer, that you're also stressing the importance of all of them being automated in a collective manner, right? It's one thing
Yes,
for each item to be automated. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy or trivial, but when you bring all of these touch points and need to automate them, there is a lot of different new challenges that we may have to
that is
address there,
hyper
right?
automation. Yes. And the traditional business owner doesn't understand the art of possible, and their thought leadership has been built around silos, right? You went to college, they taught you about the HR department, the IT department, the finance department. Now you've got to collectively take those things, remove the silos, because all of this is now going to have to integrate, and it's got to integrate at speeds that before were unknown to us. We didn't really think about the fact it's 27 milliseconds for a NASDAQ trade, and that they understood. But now it's 27 milliseconds to tell a 3PL that I've got to go pick it, and the robot's got to go grab it off the shelf, put it in the package, get it in the car that's going to show up in the next 5 minutes. That car's got to make it a mile and a half. All of that has to be in the calculation mindset of that hyper-connectedness.
Okay, that's very nice, right? Let me go to the second point that you mentioned earlier, personalization. We read a lot about this as part of, you also mentioned out of the three attributes, the second one is personalization. When you go use a service, use a product, uh, as long if it speaks to you and you're able to make a connection, then you're going to be more loyal to using that product or service. So personalization, again, much like automation, has been around a while. So, what about this attribute is different when it's in the context of automated economy?
And this is really, I think, probably the biggest point out of all three. Data-driven decisions matters, but this is who we are now today. And with 9 children, I get a chance to watch a wide spectrum of what occurs. My oldest child is 42. My youngest child is 23. And so I get to see a whole spectrum of what they consider their norms, right? And then my grandchildren, as you can imagine, I have a bunch of those, and they're all the way from 2 years old all the way up to 21 years old. Now, personalization, when you and I entered the world, was I want to actually go to the restaurant that knows me. So I go to the same place, or I want to go shop and get my hair cut. I want that feeling that it's personal to how I operate. And then we started to work in the digital world, and the digital world started to know us without us telling it to know us. And so Amazon started recommending things to us, and it started to understand us. In the first generation, it looked at things in cohorts, and it said, okay, in cohort analytics, we understand that if I am a specific cohort, I'm probably going to want these other things inside that cohort class. But that isn't enough for us anymore. My grandson, he is 11. He went to Etsy. He starts looking for something. And Etsy doesn't recognize what it is that he's intending to want versus what he's asking for. And he's frustrated after thumbing through it a couple of times. So he goes over to another site, right? This site happens to be called Sheen. And in 2 seconds, it's understood what he's really asking for because it is hyper personalized who he is. Why?
Wow.
It interconnected other things around him. It's hooked up to his TikTok. I know what videos he likes. I watch what he's doing. Now, this whole world of hyper personalization is now being grabbed and owned by us. We get to say what information across which domains do we want to share and connect. And as we permit them, we're learning to tweak our own personalized experience. And that's new for us. We used to have Facebook steal it from us and Amazon steal it from us.
R-
And now the new world is I get to block or permit it. And the wiser we get, the more we understand what to let in because it gives us a better outcome. I am a sports person, but my sports are in the range of basketball and football. I'm not a golfer. So whenever I see sports things start to show up, I get to tweak what those look like in the current world. I am personalizing them to me. Those personalization characteristics are now being picked up by other systems asking me, is it okay if I see them? 100% it is because you're something I may want, a specific shoe, a specific type of clothing. So I've begun to curate my personalization experience. I showed up the other day at a restaurant that I frequent quite often, and they have interconnected their menu with me. And when I showed up and sat down, I have a digital tablet. It said, we see that you like eggs. I'm a big egg fanatic. And it offered me 3 egg dishes, and it did so at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Why?
wow.
It knows who I am. We're about to enter an age where the personalization aspect of what you are and the digital assistant is going to overcome the commerce sites. Commerce sites are going to go away. Why? Because what you want is to interact and get what you want. That hyper personalization is starting to be enabled now by the very specific transactional webs that are being put together through hyper automation. Those two
Th-
are tightly coupled.
You know what, Kema? Through this video, you probably can't see my eyes light up, but I did actually a couple of times in your answers. I'll tell you why. Because there are two examples you took that are lovely examples, because they are very relatable examples. I want to dig deeper into each of those examples. The first one you took was when your grandson was shopping at Etsy, looking make a purchase, but the platform did not, as an example, right? Just as an example,
Sure.
it didn't understand what the person was looking for. So they switched. The consumer now goes to another place. Now here price was not, you didn't mention price. So the person was not looking for to purchase something at the cheapest cost, right? What they were looking for is, hey, do you know what I'm looking for? With me not explicitly telling you every single time that that's what I've come here to look for. When I enter the store, so I want to take a restaurant example, but I want to first go into this particular example. So, over the years, we were like, hey, the e-commerce site needs to look very cool. It needs to be attractive. The color choices, the fonts, all of them, the price, none of that seems to matter. Suddenly, in that example, what matters is how much do I know Kramer? Even if everything else, from a technology standpoint, right? I'm not saying you have to build pages that are not looking attractive or nicer, but I think as an engineer, I want to digest the fact that the CSS part perhaps did not make all the difference there, right? What
That's right.
made the difference is the data. So if you want to, I don't want to go to data yet, but your answer sort of is a nice segue to the third point. But let me ask a question. So, and your second example was restaurant. You go into the restaurant, they kind of already know what you want. And that's not because the person at the counter is somebody who, like, I eat at Potbelly all the time. And it's
100%.
nice
Yep.
because they understand you, but it's a human understanding you. Here you're talking about machines understanding you, the systems understanding you. So there are two questions I have there. One is, it's nice that they know a lot about us, so they can support that level of personalization. But the question that's going to, it begs this question: where do you draw the line of how much I want somebody else to know about me? Privacy, right? How do you walk that fine line between personalization and data privacy?
Yeah, there's two key concepts to this. One of them I'm going to steal from someone I have a lot of trust in at Google. So when we build friendships, we have different levels of friendships. There are certain friends I sit down with and I tell them about all the struggles I'm having at home with my family. And there's some that I sit down with and I talk about all the struggles that I'm having trying to lose weight. And there's some that I sit down and I talk about all the struggles I'm having trying to raise my kids to get the best outcomes for their lives. Those trust factors are calculated and presented to us daily as we interact with human beings. And in the past, that was stolen from us in the digital communities we lived in. It was taken from us. The right to have freedom on a platform because I don't pay for it meant that they thought they had the right to all of my data and consuming it however they wanted. What we've started to do now is say, I want control over how that data gets applied to the entanglement between locations, and we're making those choices. For example, I have a FICO score, and there are only certain aspects of that FICO score that I'm going to share with certain credentialed people. If I'm buying Bitcoin or if I'm doing asset purchases in an ETF, there's information I want to share with them that I know is relevant for them to help make decisions for me. So, this very first concept I call the digital friendship. We are starting to move into a world where we are becoming digital friends with the community that we deal with. And that digital friendship concept is being embraced by, Twilio Segment, and other product companies are starting to figure out how to make the digital friendship work so it can be mobile and it can be integrated across the communities that you deal with. The second concept after digital friendship, right, is how do we interact with that digital friendship in a very personal manner? Before, machines made decisions in a very computer vision oriented way, I'm going to say. Okay. The new norm is going to be the way that games operate. And so game theory is going to become massive in the world of how we do things in this digital friendship space, because game theory understands properties of how you characterize what you're doing and what to do with those. For example, if I am a runner and in my game, I like to run at a fast pace constantly for a long period of time and then slow down and take a pause and do something. The game operations start to understand how you operate inside the game and they start to maximize the stickiness to pull you into the game. They want you online in that game 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they've done this across a wide spectrum, all the way from 5-year old all the way up to 60-year-old people. I see them right now in World of Warcraft that I would have never thought, I'm hooked, man. I've been sitting here for 10 hours, right? So, one, this digital friendship, and then the art of taking that digital friendship and figuring out how to gamify it, those two constructs of hyper personalization are going to permeate our lives and remove everything around us other than that digital friendship concept. The future of how we're going to transact in the future economy will be through digital assistants, and they will be hyper personalized. They will know you, you will give them your heart. The privacy is up to you now, and the regulations going into place. Blockchain is a good example. The two things about blockchain that are amazing is out of the box, it natively understands how to teach transactional permutation consistency. Can it be hacked? We'll work through the kinks of all of that. But that block transaction is trustworthy. And that trustworthiness enables me to start to interact with these systems at a different level of autonomy, because I can go into the back end of a non blockchain system and change the data record. Once I get it out in a Web 3.0 world, I can't change the data record. There's someone else that's the entrusted transactor of that data record. So as we become digitally, personalized, and we get our digital friends, as we understand in the world of that digital friendship, this gamification, as those records stop being privatized to the platforms and publicly enabled onto these massive transaction farms that allow us to not be hindered by the privacy, right? This hyper personalization is going to kick in at Mach 5, and data driven decisions are going to make us do things that we have real data on that we didn't have access to before.
Okay, this is great, right? So you that was a segue to data driven, but just to recap what you mentioned in my own words, tell me if this makes sense. So you mentioned digital friendship, meaning, can I interpret that in layman's terms as I'm willing to actually share some data with you as a provider. Nobody forced me to go to Facebook and write about my trip to Italy, but I felt like I wanted to write about it. I wanted to share some photos, so that information was volunteered to the company, right? I want to agree that, when you see data privacy, it always seems like somebody's forcibly extorting the data from you, but that may or may not be true, because a lot of
Correct.
times we find, like you mentioned, you have trust in certain friends in certain respects, so you go talk to them about those items. So you have to find what you're comfortable with. You have to establish the digital friendship. Maybe you're comfortable sharing something on TikTok, maybe not. Maybe you're comfortable sharing something on Instagram, maybe not. So you have to make those decisions as individuals, and we share that information, which in turn allows those companies to actually curate and make these personalized recommendations to us. I mean, is that a reasonable summary of those
And
points?
they have to prove trustworthiness, because the future is going to be that trustworthiness is going to be the salt and pepper of all of the digital platforms of the future. If you cannot be trustworthy, you will not get the digital friendship. If you don't get the digital friendship, it won't work. That trustworthiness is going to become more and more, and we'll feel it every day. And we're going to interact with you. So 100%, you hit it right on the head.
Perfect. Right. So the third point, that I had some other questions, but going to the third point, just to complete those three bullets, data driven, and you had mentioned online purchases, a few examples there. Even examples like you're at the restaurant, they know what you want to eat, at what time you might want to eat that, what your favorite dish is. So you don't have to make those decisions. And I might even say that even if on that one day, Kramer, if you are not thinking about eating eggs as much as you love them, maybe someone telling you that, hey, maybe you want to eat this, might have actually reminded you of what you may have even liked, even you not knowing it, if it even in a weird way, right? If that makes sense. So,
Yes.
like I think you mentioned at the top of the call, paraphrasing what you said is, they know more than you might know about your own self, for instance, right? So data driven, to folks who are watching this, whether you're engineers, whether you're product managers, because each of us has an interest in data, but slightly differently depending on who you're talking to. I've had conversations with product managers and product leaders. The way they look at data is different from how I might look at it as a developer. So if you could just speak to data driven, and also in the context of a software company, like what are some differences between how two people playing two different roles might react to this notion of the data driven attribute?
Yeah, and this one here is where the nail in the coffin, I think, comes for what the future is going to actually do for us. So, the way we look at data and that word in most constructs, we think of it as a number thing. But our brain and how we operate as a human operates on data that crosses all the boundaries, both verbal, visual, smell, hearing. We ingest this all the time, and we consider that as humans data. And it's not just the numbers. In fact, the numbers on a real scale of what we process is a very small circle of what matters to us. A color that makes us feel warm because as a kid it had some interaction is data. We're processing that. And as we compute that, it comes to life as we look at websites and we pause for just a moment. As we look at the beauty of a sunset that matters to us over the Grand Canyon versus over the city of New York, they're both sunsets. But some of us want the sunset over New York more than the sunset over the Grand Canyon. And the engines that are now in place are starting to watch our behaviors, and they're starting to classify that behaviors into data. That is amazing for us because we have done that for centuries, since the beginning of mankind, but never called it data driven decisions. And now, as we start to interact at this next level, that data driven decision process is going to change the world and how we interact with it. For example, the very first thing that I watched with the Provision from Apple, the very first person I saw that came back calls me up. He's excited. I got to see this thing. It's so amazing. It's so amazing. Well, okay, tell me about it. I didn't get to go. I was working. So he sits down and he's made a video of what he's seen. And he said, look at the two things that actually happened. And I'm looking at it and I'm trying to figure out what they are. And he said, look at the color it makes things around me. Oh, that's my color, Kramer. That's my color. Yeah, John, that's your color. He loves this weird purple. Okay. Listen to the music that it started to play because it knows I love music. Oh, yeah, that is your music. Okay. He's an adagio, key of C guy. Okay. And so it has taken this information that it knows and it started to craft the world that he's living in because of data driven decisions that have nothing to do with numbers. Okay. We're about to walk into universes now where numbers are going to matter, but more important is the full stack. And I think Google made the first play. They just released their equivalent to ChatGPT, but they said, listen, it's got to span the whole spectrum. And it's got to take into its natural core the ability to hear, to see, to smell, to taste, to feel. All of those aspects have to now work inside the models that we operate in for data driven decisions. It's going to be a totally different world that we live in. And our children are going to be a part of that massive construct as they go to school without needing to go to school. They're going to sit down, they're going to get immersed in an environment. It's going to be totally driven around what they like, what they want to smell, how they want to feel, how warm is it. All that data driven processing is going to come online. And we have now the power to actually do that in real time for the very first time in the history of mankind. And it's just going to totally transform what we think of as data driven decisions.
I'm just mesmerized because these questions were not for folks watching. I did not send these questions to Kramer at all, right? So these answers are so clear. It's unbelievable to me. I'm sitting here and feeling the sunset that you just described, to be honest with you. So I have a question about that. And then you mentioned music, couple of things, right? So data driven and personalization seem like two different points, but they have a lot to do with each other. One helps the other, right? So you mentioned Apple's Provision. So the music resonated, the colors resonated. Now you are more connected, right? You're making that commitment to that device, and you're going to offer more data about yourself. Now you're volunteering to providing this data. Now there is more data, and then there's going to be more personalization, and then hopefully things get better and better from there. Right now, that's all the rosy side, which makes complete sense. But there is one thing that pops up when I think about this, when I say it out aloud. I'm like, this is great. Things are getting smarter and smarter. Technology is getting better and better. I'm not going to use those two words just as yet. The letter that's the first letter in the alphabet A, and then the one that looks like an I. I'm not going to put them together just as yet because I want to save those two that for later. But I want to understand, okay, what does this mean? I'm getting out of college today. I'm just going to have a slight digression here. I'm getting out of college.
Yes.
I'm listening and watching this. This is awesome. This is exciting. This seems very futuristic, and it is futuristic, right? That is the truth. But a little bit worried. I'm a little bit concerned. It's natural human emotions. Do I understand all of this? What does it mean? I'll give you an example before I end this question, Kramer. When I talk to people about a lot of things that change, there are different kinds of people, right? I mean, we're all different and unique. some of us are super stoked about some of the things that are happening, right? Very excited, and there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things you don't know, but you're still super stoked about what's
You're
coming
hyped.
ahead of us,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And then there's people like, okay, you know what? Sure, there's all these things happening. Maybe it makes a ton of a difference. Maybe it doesn't, and maybe even if it does is it going to affect me? I don't know. I'm not going to worry about it. I don't care. I'm going to be indifferent to it. And then there's a third group of people. They're flat out just worried and concerned and scared and not sure what this means. I mean, I read an article on New York Times a few weeks ago that talked about, South Korea, if I remember correctly, and it said, the birth rate has declined, plummeted. And one of the
Yes.
reasons they mentioned was parents are genuinely worried about the future of their children that are not yet born. I'm paraphrasing some of what I read because they're not sure what it means for us for jobs and whatnot, right? So,
Right.
what do you, before I go more specific into these questions, how do you address, if I put these three as three categories of people, Kramer, how do you address each of them?
Yeah. In fact, I give a talk about this to some universities here about the future of what I'm going to classify as the computer, the machine. The word of our company was CC, cooperative computing. The reason that I called it that so long ago was because when I got out of school, I was promised something. I was promised that technology would be so amazing, it would make my life better. And I'd have all these amazing outcomes from all the technology that was at my fingertips. And I found that most of the time, it just made it different and not better. It wasn't really any easier. It wasn't until we started seeing cloud transform the fact of setting up computers and making it quick. So there's these key concepts, okay? One key concept is this. There are those who make the air that others breathe, and there are those who breathe the air from others. And you learn to start to be someone who makes the air that other breathe when your fear goes away and you learn to embrace the reality of what it is that's the truth of the thing. Okay. As a quantum physicist, first truths really matter to me. Let's take the automobile. To a person who first embraced the automobile, looked at it and went, I really like that, right? Well, what do I like about it? And why am I embracing it? They're giving of themselves over to someone else in the character and care. Because with a horse, it was personal. I usually groomed it. I usually fed it. I usually rode it. If it didn't ride white, I went and trained it. I did all these things to make the horse mine. And with the car, I'm giving over the quality control, the fact it's going to go for 300 miles and not die on me. And I'm putting trust inside someone else's ability to generate a fantastic result, right? Now, that process of making the air that others breathe or breathing other people's air, right, has two consorts to it because just like there's evil in mankind, whether we like it or not, it's real, right? The machine's going to start to think and operate more and more like mankind. There will be a construct of that thing that can be bad. And we have to really watch the biases that we're introducing to how those machines think and learn about us so that those biases do not turn it into the part of us that we don't want to be. Now, that's not an easy task, but it's still real. So the fear that we have, those three categories, right? I really am amazed and I'm in wonder of the amazing things, the abundant thought, right? That lets us adopt it quickly are going to come from people that are uh, able to embrace the change and manage the risk of that change in the way that they personally interact with it. There's going to be a massive quantity of people that do that well. The second are those that are the realist, right? I expected more out of it than what I got. I'm a little grumpy, right? Your second classification of technically it's going to function the way I want it to, but I'm not as amazed as what someone else is. And then the third person that's fearful of it, right? That fearfulness is probably a categorization of things that are seen through the eyes of others until they embrace it. So, you know, That digital friendship that I said was so important is going to have to live at every level of this future digital world that we live in. Because I'm not going to trust autonomous babysitter to my 2 year old daughter that I don't think has got the controls in place to not harm my 2 year old daughter, that will do what's best for my 2 year old daughter. And out of those three people, one will say, I'm so glad that I have this autonomous person taking care of it because this person can react faster than I can administer care in a much better fashion than I can understand things in the environment and hear stuff better than I can. The extreme end of that is someone who says, I have no idea what's running through the mind of that entity that's in my house, and it could go nuts and just crush my child, right?
Right.
So we will react to that the same way we react to mankind in the world we live in today. I think machines are going to force us to start to look at humanity as a single entity and start to think of the machines as a single entity. And as we start to evolve through that process, as mankind living on one side and starting to adopt the other side, it's going to become more and more a part of us learning how to adapt to what is going to become, 1,000 times faster, smarter, more efficient, more effective at things than we are, other than the certain core spiritual aspects that make humankind what humankind should be whenever we stop worrying about that circle of, that outside circle that is we can't control. We just worry about it and it gets us down and gets us depressed, right? So, in those three aspects, right, as we see our worlds adopting to what's happening, um, there is a book that talks about the fourth turning. Have you ever read this book?
No.
Okay. In the book, it describes curves that mankind has gone through. It's like the law of gravity. And in those curves are curves that are in cycles where the parent is afraid and the child is not. And then the child is afraid and the parent is not. And as we see our children come through the gauntlet and survive in ways that we never could and become amazing users and consumers of this new space, right? They will overcome the inadequacies of what this is by embracing, I think, humankind to pull through to adopt to what that inadequacy looks like. We cannot do that today because today our inadequacies are against each other. Our religions, our beliefs, our races, all these other things that really don't matter as a species, that will matter tremendously to us as we start to look at this new technology. I think we'll start to embody each other's capability as human beings to adopt this technology and begin to adapt that as a species much more effectively. Those three barriers will start to get broken down.
Broken.
And
So which
we're
means,
seeing
as
some of that today.
if I was somebody who was intimidated, like worried about these changes, the breadth of these changes coming, you spoke to that. But can I say that you cannot delay the inevitable, right? Things will change, just like if cars. When the car, you took the example of horses and cars. I mean, how long could you have argued that horse is going to be the only way we would actually transport ourselves? Cars were meant to come, they changed, they now become electric vehicles. So is it fair to say that sometimes all those exciting things that happen, they're typically outside, where there's this diagram with two circles, right? Big one and a small one. I always refer to that. But it says everything that's exciting is happening in the tiny circle far, far away. So is it fair to say, Kramer, then whether you fear this or do not fear this, you're going to have to bring yourselves to accepting reality, and the reality is in the next 5 or 10 years, even sooner, but I'm just throwing 5 to 10 years, things are going to be very, very, very different from how they were in the last 10 years. Is that a fair thing to say, that it's going to be quite different, the last decade compared to the next decade compared to the last one?
Um, I think if you think about the way we measure difference, let's just take that for just a moment and say what would different look like, right? I think there's going to be evolutionary things and revolutionary differences. The evolutionary things are going to be more, there's going to be a lot of them. The ability for us to have a car that drives us to work, right? It's a not a revolution, it'll be an evolution, right? The number of those things that show up because of what technology is doing is going to be large, and they will be adopted with less fear than the things that are revolutionary. For example, you may find that the best president of the United States is not a man, it is a machine. And our ability to accept that as a society and a species is going to take a lot of thought. And we've got to start to think about what do we want to occur? Someone that understands the economy, understands global politics, understands how to be human in the face of all things that are dangerous, understands how to embrace the society that needs the help and the leadership. You know, that may be a second nature to an entity that can operate and understand at a level so much faster than we can that it's better for it to do that. That thing is revolutionary and not evolutionary. So the world that's going to be drastically different in 5 years will have these small evolutionary changes. We will see lots of those happen all over the place. Then we'll start to face in the next 10 to 15 years the revolutionary change. The frustration that one day I will have because my boss is probably smarter than I am, faster than I am, more elegant than I am, because my boss is a machine and it outthinks me, it outcalculates, it knows what the budget is, it's able to massively do all this stuff so much quicker than I can, right? And as those digital people start to interact with us, and we have to cooperate with the computers, and we have to become one together, that's going to come from the children that are 5 years old today, because they won't think anything about it. They're not going to be afraid of it. And it'll take 2 generations for the fear from their parents to be dismissed by the adoption of the child that comes back into that second wave or the fourth turning, if you will. And so to directly answer, there's going to be the things that are evolutionary will be a lot. They'll just sneak up on us. One day we had cars, we didn't think about it. One day we had TVs, we didn't think about it. One day we had refrigerators, we didn't think about it, right? And so those things that are what I call event horizons are very few. The gas engine,
Mm.
event horizon. What does event horizon do? It sucks everything into it, everything. And it started with a car, moved to a plane, then went to a train. That gas engine, the combustion engine, was an event horizon. Okay, the internet was an event horizon. No one asked for it; it just happened. And when it happened, everything got sucked into it. This next event horizon that's coming up is that man-machine interface, what we call AI, is an event horizon. We didn't ask for it; it's going to be here, and everything's going to get gravitated to it and sucked into it. What we'll see is the next 5 years, these evolutionary changes. After that will become the huge revolutionary changes. Mankind, I think, has shown an ability to adapt. Will have to adapt as a single species to interact with what will become another species.
You know, Kramer, you articulate things so beautifully that if for the next 45 minutes you told me how economy should not be automated, I would still gladly accept all of them as well without disagreeing because it's just beautifully articulated. It's lovely. So going
Thank
back to
you.
what you were saying there, right? Uh, so let's say that the advice is clearly not to be fearful. And I'll add one more thing to what you're saying there, even if it's a slightly different example, but not that different. You know, GitHub's Copilot, for instance, just taking a very specific engineering
Yes.
example. When I
Yep.
talk to developers, there's always this fear. Oh, you know what? The automation is going to come get our jobs. Well, it always came to get jobs, but it's almost like the white collared workforce was not particularly concerned because it did not come after, at least in my interpretation, right or wrong. It did not come for your job. So you were like, sure, doesn't matter as much to me, maybe. Now you have this fear that it's going to come to your job. The reactions are, in my mind, a little bit more profound, right? It was
Yes.
always coming after jobs. I mean, the
Yes.
horse lost its job in that form and shape when the cars came, right? I don't know how horses feel or think, but if I were a horse, I would have been worried. Are the cars going to replace me? They sure did. I have to find a different purpose, right? So now when I talk to developers, it's like, oh my god, do I? It was kind of interesting because I almost had to convince developers, really good developers, to use something like Copilot, because my initial thought was we're going to just embrace it, like, yeah, sure, there's a better way to do something, let's give it a look and let's see if we can help us. But it was not, that is not the reaction I saw. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a
Yes.
small sample size, I'm not generalizing it, but I'm just sharing my experience.
Yes.
And then when I said, okay, let's try it, we're going to try it this week, we're going to try it for 3 weeks, we're going to then decide whether it made a difference or not. And then the reactions were very, very different. Now we are able to actually write code faster, better, because the tool is able to help us in being able to do that. So unless you get out of that zone of fear, you're not going to be able to embrace it. But as you grow older, some of these things become a little bit more clear. I'm not saying age makes you wiser, but I want to believe it does as I get older. But if I'm graduating today, Kramer, I'm seeing all of this, I'm excited for the future. But it's natural to be fearful of things you don't exactly understand as well. How do you pretend that I'm grading out of college? It's going to be hard with all the gray hair, but imagine I were grading out of college today. What would your advice be to me to embrace this notion of automation and automated economy and shed all my fears and just be super stoked about marching forward?
That's a great question. And I'm going to rephrase it or repeat it back to hear it. I'm 21 and I've entered. It's now, 5 years later, and I'm 26. I've watched the world as it processes all the things it's processing, and it's gone through everything. How do I allow myself that thinking of abundance to adopt what it is that it's doing in a way that's meaningful? And how do I make that happen so that I don't interrupt myself for what I could take advantage of because of it, right? And I think there's two key considerations that need to be taken by that graduate student, right? Number one, you're now an artisan. We're moving from the age of the tactile into the age where artists are now, um, all of us have to become more artistic. Okay. And why do I say that? So, when I was in the Air Force, we were just introducing the concept of drone pilots. And regular pilots were fearful of drone pilots, okay? Because what am I going to fly? And so the drone pilot would be operating a cockpit and could operate two or three devices at a time if they were good. And so their professional operational capabilities got better and better and better. And the reality of what they were fearful of was different. So they were less concerned about doing a Mach 5 G turn left than a pilot would be when he knows that's going to hit my stomach and I might black out. So they were able to push forward quicker. We have to learn to be those in the next generation of our society and be really good at it. I run a calculator for my quantum mathematics. And that calculator requires me to understand some key principles, but I'm not going to write those on the whiteboard. I know that looks very cool inside all the movies, but I'm just not going to do that. And so those that are coming out now, they've got to learn how to interact with that digital interface and the prompts, the chat GPT queries to get the best response from it, right? They've got to learn how to embrace that technical interface and how to adopt to that technical interface to get the most out of it, because it allows them a freedom to become an artist and a creator at a rate that's 10 or 20 times faster than what they could if they limited the scope of what they're willing to embrace and how they're willing to embrace it. So that one, find abundance in how you learn to do the things that accelerate your value. Accelerate your value. Find the value space and accelerate it. Okay. And now you can go across domains. If you and I wanted to be a neurologist 15 years ago, to learn that, to understand that, to process that, oh my gosh. Now That information's at your fingertips. You and I can make really good decisions that we couldn't
Right.
get to before about how to take care of our health that are real. They're not fake, right? And so that graduate student has all of that information at their fingertips, and they need to become an artisan of data, information, how to process it to create real human value. We stop worrying about anything more than how we do that and do that effectively.
You said two things there, right? Many things, but two things I want to follow up on. Art, uh, being artistic is important, and it's very it resonates with me because I love art. I have a lot of respect for folks, who can play the music, who can draw, who are creative. I go to the Western Arts Festival diligently every single year without missing it. I talk to a lot of the artists. It's very close to my heart for many reasons. One being I have no such skill, like zero, right? If there was no engineering, no software, I would be in big trouble, right? So I have a lot of respect, for art. And I actually did a podcast not a while ago, Kramer, where I spoke to code also being art, right? I look at code because that's the only thing I
100%.
know how to create. How there is art because there is beauty in how you write what you write. The fact that it doesn't look so pretty the next day and you come back and you're like, oh my God, who wrote this? And then you do a git blame and it says you wrote it. You're like, no, 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 I need to do this better. And you improve upon it as a person, right? Because you want to appease yourself and then be feel good about what you did. So being artistic is important, but being artistic, and sorry to all the artists, because I'm not an artist, but I'm just going to use that loosely, believing that I have some skills in coding, treating it as an art. uh, that means you have to love what you do, right? Unless you
Yeah,
feel strongly about
it's
it,
a
like when you're
great
talking
point.
about this topic, your energy and your interest and your passion towards a topic cannot be hidden, right? It just cannot be hidden. So does that mean it's stating the obvious, but to make all of this happen as a fresh graduate, I need to find my calling. And I want to say one thing before I want you to speak to your thoughts on it, Kramer, is I loved Anthony Bourdain. I sorely miss that
Yes,
Anthony Bourdain is not around. It's
yes,
something I still cannot come to terms with. And he said in one of the episodes that he found his calling when he was like 44 or something like that, right? Which means somebody who's brilliant at what they do may not have found their calling till 44. So the question I have is, everything is an art. We need to respect what we do. We need to enjoy what we do. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to do it well. And we have to find our calling. All of this seems very complicated. How do I navigate this?
yeah. And I think the thing that you brought out is really important for us to understand, right? Which is find my calling and how do I interpret that I found my calling is a very challenging thing, I think, today because of the options that we have in front of us, right? The number of things that we can capably do have gone exponentially up from where it was 100 years ago. So, one, how do you navigate finding your calling? We have this construct that um, there's three key things that have happened in our world. One, thought leadership has not kept up with how fast the world is changing. Number two, the art of possible has accelerated at a rate it's never been at before, so we struggle to keep up with the art of possible. But number three is the risk of failing through testing has gone down and we've missed it. So in the old days, if you wanted to stand up a database and an API and all these other things, you had to go get a server, you had to stick it in a computer, stick it under your desk and power it up and get the monitor working, yada, yada, yada. Now you click a few buttons and poof, it's up in the cloud. And then you click another few buttons with open source and poof, it's compiled. And then the next thing you do is you wire it up using, if you're on AWS, you just use AWS application that actually deploys all the components for it. Poof, you got a mobile app. So the art of testing quickly and failing fast has gone up 1,000. It's you can test things you've never thought of before really, really quickly. And you can now test, what do I like to do? What do I want to do? What do I want to be responsible for and enjoy being responsible for? So, your key construct of what is it that we find that we love and how do we find it and love it, test many things as fast as you can. Write a book, publish it on Amazon. You could write the book with ChatGPT in probably 2 days. You can tweak it 10 times. You can find an editor right now in Amazon's online editorial services. You can publish it, and you may find out you just made $1 million, because all you got to do is sell 300, let's just say you sell 10,000 copies at $10 a piece. You did something that you would have never thought of in your wildest dream, and it would have taken you 180 hours. You couldn't do that before. Try it. Next, try cooking, right? Try going out into space and thinking about things that you may want to do out in space. There are now ways that you can do that online. You have unlimited risk to try thousands of things until you find the right one. My oldest son, I put him through Oracle school. He gets all the way, three-quarters of the way through it, gets to the end and decides, this ain't for me. Got it. Then he goes to school to be a nurse. Gets about 2 semesters into that, decides, that ain't for me. Got it. And then he goes to recruiting, which I would shoot myself in the head if I had to be a recruiter. That's an amazing job. And he's amazing at what he does in recruiting. But he did it fast. He did it quick. Now you can do that 4 times quicker than you could have because of the ability to do that in these worlds that we live in now. So fail fast. Understand what you love quickly is so crucial so that you can be passionate about it and it becomes a part of your life instead of a job.
I wish I got this advice 2 decades ago. I wish you had spoken to me 2 decades ago, Kramer, because it would have made a ton of a difference. So, anyone watching this today, I think this is amazing. Fail fast and do as many things as you can is actually, and your examples were lovely as well. I mean, unsurprisingly so, right? I'm just going to add a couple of more things for folks who are watching it from, different parts of the world, not just the US, for instance, because, I speak to it as somebody who was born and raised in India. I was very young when I moved here. So I've lived in the US most of my life. But still, there are things, again, when they say when you migrate, time stops. So I'm going to speak to India as when I left it, which is going to be clearly wrong, but I'm just going to say it regardless. When you grow up, it's not like we were given very many choices. I'm not blaming anybody, but it was almost like, yep, you're going to go do engineering or you're going to be a doctor or one of these things. You had to pick from one of these three things, right? There was not that many things. And I'm not saying I had a lot of other skills that I could have chosen to be a chef or an artist, but you never had those. You never asked yourself. You never paused to ask yourself, do I want to do what I'm doing? Because I studied sales and marketing for a number of years alongside engineering, Kramer, and then when I'm starting to sell the products that we're making at Snowpal, I've realized that it's quite detached from the readings, from the learnings, because when you do it practically, it's very different, right? It's not like reading a book and it's great. It sounds awesome, but when you go to execute it, it's a lot more challenging. It's very differently challenging. So, right. So I want to reiterate, just stress even in a louder voice, and just not louder voice, meaning because my voice is just loud, saying that try as many things as you can try, and it's okay to fail as long as you feel like you gave it your best, and then you try the next thing, you try the third thing. And you mentioned your son who's a brilliant recruiter, but it took different professions for that person to recognize what they were going to actually enjoy doing. Now this
Yes.
might sound, only thing I want to add is, depending on where you're watching this from, some of this might come across as privilege, if you will, right? As somebody who's sitting in a place of privilege, like as people, as where we've done this a bit, we have some choices when you pick, and you might be wondering, do I have these options available? I
That's a
want
great.
to I have a couple of thoughts, Kramer, but I just want you to speak to, what if I feel like this is great? I accept what Kramer is saying. I understand this, but do I have the, am I in a position to be able to do this? What do you have to say for somebody who might be in those situations?
Yeah, and this is an excellent point. I think this is. I take a bunch of teenage kids through this program that I do every year that allows them to see that it doesn't matter where you come from. It only matters where you want to go, right? And we live in a world right now. I would tell you that if you walked out into any population we're at in the continental United States, the cell phone is in the hand of almost everyone of every nature you can think of, all the way to the guy living on the side of the street quite often. We have in our hands the most powerful computer that we could have ever dreamt of, 15, 20 years ago. And so there is nothing anymore stopping us because all the things that we talked about today are present in the palm of your hand. So there's only one thing that will stop you from that exploration is which button you choose. Do you choose the chat GPT button and start interacting with the smartest entity in the world right now? Or do you choose the Netflix button? There's a time for that. Or do you choose, the Reddit button or, Instagram button, right? So you have choices at the palm of your hand to accelerate who you are in a way that you never have before, regardless of religion, gender, race, or tribe. That none of those matter anymore. Now, there are certain places that are being devastated right now, and that devastation hurts us. Every one of us should be pained by that devastation. But outside of those, we have in our hand the ability to build our own world and see it and play with it very, very quickly in ways we never could have ever before.
So the choice is yours, is what you're saying,
A
right?
hundred
You
percent.
have to make those decisions.
Yes.
I have a lot more I want to ask in that regard, but this is a good point to pause uh, because I'm going to, I have more questions, but I want to have teasers and I want to convince Kramer to come back because I have a lot more questions in my mind before other people have me ask questions to ask you. Uh, so we've talked a number of things in terms of we started a lot of this relates to automated economy, but a lot of what you recommended, what you've shared, Kramer, I want to say goes also beyond that, because a lot of what you've advised, what you've shared, is a lot of it is personal, and all of it is applicable to even situations outside the core concept of what we were having this conversation on, right? A lot of them, to me, it's a product, right? Your answers were less applications, more products that I could take those learnings and
Yes.
apply them to the best of my ability to a lot of different things I do, right? That's what I want to say. uh, any any thoughts before we end this? First, I see this as one of many sessions that I'm going to somehow drag drag you
You bet.
into. But any closing thoughts on this session, this conversation, before we end
I think
this,
there's three
Kramer?
things we should think of as we end this session. One, the automated economy is here and it's accelerating. Our ability to get access to anything we want that is good for us and wholesome for us is at a rate it's never been before. Two, we can participate in that in a way we never could before. All the way from the simplest and really easy things like taking data and tagging it to the very sophisticated creating algorithms the machines are going to use for the future. And number three is the abundance of what we think about and how we embrace this is how this will turn into what mankind sees it as the future. The machines are learning from our input data. And that input data, when it's free of fear and it's abundant and it's amazing and full of blessing, becomes that. So we want to put that into the system as much as we can and as um, purposefully as we can to make certain that we're teaching this newborn child that's coming up what it means to actually live a full and abundant life and do so alongside of us as it becomes a separate species.
Thank you so much, Kramer. I'm going to end this session with that thought. I want to say thank you very much to Kramer for taking time. But before I hit stop, I want to say that please, folks, I'm going to include links so you can check out cooperative computing. The website is cooperativecomputing.com. And then if you go do a cooperativecomputing.com/blog/automated dash economy, you'll see an article as well that speaks a lot to some of the conversations we've had in this session here. So I think with that, I'm going to just end this session. Thank you so much, Kramer.
It was
Super appreciate you
fantastic being
taking
here.
that time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on again at some time. And I think the future is full of the automated economy. Very excited to be here.
So thank you.